want you to get your Bibles out and go to Luke chapter 13. Luke chapter 13. Look at all that daylight outside. Isn't that unbelievable? Man, you know what? Yesterday, that was like 1:30 in the afternoon. That's all that was. They just renamed light. I'm just bitter about the time change thing. Can y'all tell? I just really despise it from the depths of my heart. Luke chapter 13, and we're going to read verse 6 here in just a few minutes, but we are in this sign series, and tonight I want to talk on the topic of bringing life back to our town. Bringing life back to our town. And that's what I've asked you to do. Just go around taking pictures, different signs and things, and I want to encourage you to still do that. Keep taking pictures. Please send those in. Bridget will get it through the website. We'll post it up there. And we've got a nice little pile of pictures going on the web. How many of you gone on the website and looked at some of those pictures? Good. There's some of them we're just not going to be able to get to all of them. There's some really funny ones in there too. So I'd encourage you to go to the website and check that out. But tonight I want to talk on bringing life back to our town. There was a picture that was sent in a couple of weeks ago. If you show this first picture here, Maddox Parkway, right down here in Chatsworth, goes right through the middle of town. How many of you know who Maddox was? How many of you knew who he was? Let me read to you who Maddox was. I looked this up because I was curious myself. Got this from the Georgia Agriculture Education Hall of Fame website, all right? Mr. G.I. Shorty Maddox, love of teaching agriculture was exceeded only by his love of students. After 8 hours in the classroom, he visited his students' homes and farms, applying the reinforcing principles taught in the classroom. He taught at Murray County High for 34 years. Many of Mr. Maddox's students were elected state FFA leaders, including a state FFA president. Several students receiving national FFA recognition, including the American Farmer degree. Chapter members showed more cattle in the Atlanta Steer Show than any other chapter as long as the chapter exhibited. One of Mr. Maddox's major contributions was the establishment and the operation of the Murray County Cannery, which was named in his honor in 1981. The facility processed homebreds, cakes, meats, and other products. During World War II and the Korean War, many of these products were sent to those serving in the armed forces. Mr. Maddox was instrumental in assisting families in establishing college education funds through student participation in the Atlanta Fat Cattle Show. That's an awesome name for a show. The Fat Cattle Show. And the feeder calf sale. Many students earned enough money through the sale of their show animals to pay a major part of their college expenses. Mr. Maddox did this. He involved himself in such a way in the community that he changed people's lives and brought long-lasting results. That's what he did. And he did it through agriculture. One of the things that I love about what it says is not only did he teach the principles, but he went to their homes and he showed people how to get things done, and he really changed the course of their lives. Jesus tells a story in Luke chapter 13, starting in verse 6, and this is what he says. He told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it, and he found none. And he said to the vine dresser, look, for 3 years now I've been coming and seeking fruit on the fig tree, and I find none. Now that's significant because if the tree doesn't fruit in 3 years, after you plant the tree, establish it in new soil, you give it 3 years to establish itself and bear fruit. And if after 3 years you are justified as the owner of the vineyard in saying this tree is unprofitable, I want it cut down so that it doesn't waste the nutrients in the soil and doesn't take away valuable space for other trees that will bear fruit. He's justified in this judgment. But the vine dresser, he says, cut it down. Why should I use up the ground? And he answered him, the vine dresser answered, sir, let it alone this year also until I dig around it and put on manure. See, Jesus talked about manure too, so I can preach about it. Then if it should bear fruit next year, well and good, but if not, you can cut it down. So basically what he's saying is this. How in the world does you glean something spiritual out of a story about manure? All right? So what's going on is this. It's an important story because it teaches us how to make change in an environment in which it seems things are not changing. It shows us how to get involved in a place and bring fruit out of a situation that otherwise seems hopeless. But what do we learn about this parable is this? Number one, the barren fig tree is not an uncommon image in the Bible. A lot of times it talks about nations. Most often he's talking about Israel. If you look at the context, verses 1 through 5, you can see very plainly there, they're asking this tower, what about this act of evil where this tower fell and killed all these people? Jesus is saying, you don't need to worry about that, because if you don't repent in your own life, you too also will perish. That's the point I'm trying to make. And over again in the prophets, and over again in the parables, and over again in Jesus' teaching, He alludes to Israel as a fig tree that is either out of season or in season and not bearing fruit. And He's trying to press home the point that, hey, listen, you've had time to change. It is time for you to respond and bear fruit, or the judgment is coming. So that's what He's telling them, the barren fig tree. So the judgment to come is well justified because they are not changing in the message. Number two, the parable tells us this. The vine dresser identifies the problem may not be with the tree, the problem may be with the soil. And so he says, why don't we do this? Let's change the conditions of the soil and give the tree an opportunity of grace. Enough time to respond. Number three, the grace of the year works in conjunction with the change of the conditions in the soil. So he's saying, you as the owner of the vineyard, I need grace to give it time. And I as the vine dresser am going to introduce something into the conditions of the soil and change. And these are going to work together. But ultimately, the tree must respond, or it will be cut down. You give it time, I'll give it manure, right? Let it respond. Let's see if it takes these nutrients, if it responds to these changes. If not, it will ultimately be lost. Number four, the conditions of the soil may be changed, but ultimately the tree must respond. And so Jesus is telling them, you can hear the message, you can receive the teaching, but if you do not do what I'm saying, judgment will come. I'll give you grace. I'll give you change in the soil. I'll give you the concepts, but you've got to key in on what I'm telling you to do. Now, you know what Maddox did? He changed the conditions of the soil in the lives of people that would have otherwise been lost. He went to a group of people, a lot of people said, they'll never amount to anything. He went to a group of people who were struggling to make ends meet, into a community that potentially could have been lost. And what I really admire about the story of Maddox is not only was he an educated man, but he did not believe that you can just preach and teach concepts. He actually went to the farms and into the homes and showed people, this is how we change the soil. This is how you go to college. This is how you have a profitable farm. This is how you do these things. And your life will be different if over time you will apply my teaching, and this is how we're going to do it. In that way, you've really got to love the story of Maddox, and you got to love that every time you drive down the parkway into Chatsworth, there is a sign reminding us that if a person will get involved in the soil of lives, he can bring life back to our town. That's what that sign is saying. Think about this. But you're saying, all right, so you're calling Maddox manure. No. But isn't it interesting that Jesus he uses a couple of metaphors for the church to make change? He says the church is supposed to be something involved in the community. It's not supposed to be something that is just in a community, but it's supposed to be something that brings change and life into a community. And two of his most favorite metaphors are what? Salt and light. And we talk about what salt and light does to change a situation and change a community. But have you ever thought about Jesus turns around and say, hey, and also you're kind of like manure. You're like, well, thanks. That's real flattering. But think about what he's saying here. Number one is this: manure contains enzymes, microorganisms, and nutrients that when added to the soil stimulate growth because the plants pull from it. I love what Eugene Peterson calls manure. You know what he calls manure? He calls manure the stuff of resurrection. That's pretty awesome when you think about it. It's something that can go into barren soil and bring back life again. Number two, it takes time for manure to work. Real change in our community and real change in people's lives who are lost and without Christ, it is not overnight, instantaneous change. It takes time for people to learn concepts and become disciples and Christ followers. In order for people to change, they must be nurtured in change. They must be fed by something different in their lives. Number three, there is nothing glamorous about manure. Nothing. Changing communities is no easy task, but I want you to think about something with me for just a moment. Most of what the church does is attractional in nature. We do things and we do events on our campus and say, look how great this is. We're going to do something so fantastic that you will just be so enticed to come and be with us, and you'll see how wonderful all this really is. Now, we want people to come to campus, and some people do respond to getting in church and seeing we're not as scary as everybody thought we were, and some of those people are going to stick. But hey, I want you to understand this. To do the real work of change in the lives of people that are very, very far away from Christ, we must do things that are not attractive at all. We've got to leave the church and get into the soil and get into the dirt and do the dirty work in the dirty places with what we would consider to be dirty people. We got to get involved in lives. There are some people, there's a lot of people in our community. It does not matter if we have, I don't know who, to come and speak, or I don't know what, to come and give away, or I don't know what, to come and build. There's some people that will never come until you establish a relationship and get into their lives and into their world and do the dirty work. Manure. For manure to work, to be life-giving, it must be applied. The only way manure makes change is if it is worked into the soil. Listen to me. There is an extent at which we say we don't want the church to be like the world. I understand that. Please get me when I say this. But we must understand the church cannot just exist in this community. This church must somehow work itself into the soil of this community. It must be in the places where things are happening. If we are to make an impact, we've got to become a part of the soil. We have got to be manure. We have got to become the stuff of resurrection. Hey, listen, the church was designed to change the community. The church was designed to give life. And if we do our jobs and do what Jesus says and spread into the soil and into the community, you know what's going to happen? Life is going to start popping up all around us. That's what this is all about. And so we want to get into these places and into these communities and become the stuff of life and see resurrected life popping up all over town. If the church separates itself and becomes, like I talked about last weekend, institutionalized, if all of our ministry and all of our practice and all the stuff that we do is concentrated all on evangelism on this dirt, and we do not get out there in the other dirt, we lose the Great Commission. Remember what Geomatics did? He did not just teach and preach a message. He left the classroom and went into the homes and got to know the families and said, this is how you do a farm. At some point, we've got to realize that my preaching is not enough, that our classes are not enough, that what we say from the pulpit is not enough. And hey, listen to me. Even what we think and believe, even as strongly as we think and believe it, is not enough. At some point, we've got to go into people's lives and say, this is how we live for Jesus. This is how we love Christ. This is how we repent of sin. This is why we believe Jesus has resurrected. In order for our town to have a chance at new life, we have got to get the gospel and get ourselves into the soil. There's a book written by Randy White called Encounter God in the City, and he gives a lot of principles and a lot of questions that go right along with what I'm asking you to do. I want you to think like a missionary about our town. I want you to drive down the streets and look at things like you've never seen them before. And I'm going to give you a bunch of questions and a bunch of things. And it's going to be, I describe this a lot of times like taking a wheelbarrow full of dirt and dumping it in your lap and just hoping you catch it a little bit, right? Now, tomorrow I'm going to post this on my blog, feelmyfaith.com, and you can read through this list of questions again. And I would encourage you just familiarize yourself with it, look at it hard, and begin driving around town thinking in these concepts of how, if we observe these things, that we work ourselves into the soil. Number one is this. What are the influential institutions of our town? How are we should be asking questions like this. What are the schools? Where are they? How many are there? How do they represent the surrounding community? Because the school becomes a microcosm of all the people that live around it. If you want to know what's in the community, all you got to do is visit the school. It'll tell you the demographics of everybody that lives there. And so we look at the school. What sorts of businesses are in our area? Are there more places to get quick cash than there are banks? Show the next slide. You know what? If you look around you and you see a lot of signs that say quick cash, and there's not a lot of banks in our town, that tells you one thing about the story of what's going on in our town. Look at the institutions. Look at the restaurants. Look at what people are selling. Look at what people are advertising. And it tells you a lot about the people and the cravings and the needs of the folks in our town. Number two, what are the perceptions and the problems of these institutions? The schools, the businesses, the banks, whatever. What are the people in the community saying about these places? Are they good or bad? Or do they say they're worthless, they're pathetic, there's no use for them? Or they say, man, if it wasn't for that school, or it wasn't for that business, or it wasn't for that place, if I didn't go there once a day, or I didn't spend my money there and go there once a week, man, my life would be so much different. Where do people gather in our town? I went to lunch with Zach the other day, and he named some Chinese restaurant. I don't remember what it was, but it was a Chinese thing, buffet. If it's Chinese, it's going to be something buffet, right? And he said, if you want to reach this group of people, you go to that place. There you go. That's what you do. Where are the different cliques and cultures and people of our town gathering, and why do they gather and go to those places in our town? Number three, what are our relationships to these institutions? Do we have people who work in these places or hold memberships in these institutions? You know, it's amazing. Sometimes we come to church and don't ask the most obvious questions of people around us when we're trying to do mission work and trying to reach the people of our town. We don't look at each other and say, where do you work? Where do you work out? Where do you go to school? If we put a pin on every place you were this week, it would be unbelievable how many places this church goes in our town. Into the soil. You follow? You see what we're saying here? How do we involve ourselves as a church with community events? Do we volunteer? Do we go out there and serve? Do we say, hey, we'll park cars? You know, one of the things we found at Ridgecrest was that the Trustville Junior High was struggling to get guys to volunteer to come park cars. You know why? Because all the dads want to see their boys play ball, man. They don't want to park cars. So you know what we said? We'll come park the cars for you. People come by, why are y'all doing this? We're just, Ridgecrest Baptist Church just trying to help you out. And we developed a relationship, and it helped us to get into what was going on in our town right there. Do we use their facilities? Do we have any leaders, managers, or owners of any of these institutions that come to our church, that attend Liberty? There are 4 major sectors that make up the soil of our town. I want you to think about this. You're like, dude, I didn't know I was going to come to church and listen to something like this. Just think about it, okay? Number 1 is the local government. Has massive influence on our town. Does it or does it not? Sure enough. How does the community relate to the local government? What are the perceptions of what's going on in local government? Whenever people talk about the decisions that our managers or our councilmen or our mayors are making, what do they say about what's going on in Chatsworth? How do people in our town experience the government? Is there trash being picked up? Are the local government institutions, are they falling apart? Are the buildings falling over? Are there eyesores? What about zoning? How does certain zoning decisions affect the people that live around there? Are they really disgruntled and upset? If you find those things going on in our town, maybe it gives us an inroad to say, you know what, maybe we can go over there and meet a need. Maybe we can go over there and have a conversation. Maybe we can go over there and really help things out. Hey, listen, what's being said in this thing? This is the story of our town. If you want to figure out how to reach our town, read this thing. Right? Right on the front page of the Friday newspaper, it says, Quartet of visiting Belgian students speak highly of Dalton. That's really cool. Do you know 2 of those students were at our church 3 weeks ago? That's pretty neat. Hey, listen, I bet you say, man, we want to do foreign missions and we want to go overseas and all that kind of stuff. I bet you if they came and had a great experience, I bet you there's going to be some more students from Belgium coming who need to hear the gospel. Hey, Liberty, what are we going to do about that? I wonder if next time a group from Korea or Belgium or Japan or South America or Canada or whatever, I wonder if next time they came to our town, what if we went to the mayor, or what if we went to Dalton College, or what if we went to the institution that is bringing them here, instead of us, having to raise $2,000 or $3,000 to go over there? Huh? What if we went and said, hey, when's the next group coming? Can we have dinner with them? Can we supply some homes for them? Can we give them clothes? What can we do to help them out? And all of a sudden, you're into that soil. You see that? When the church stops just reading the paper and saying, hey, look, that's really cool. But you know what Spurgeon said? Spurgeon said you ought to read the Bible in one hand and have the newspaper in the other. That's how you start to spread the gospel. When you read this and you go, what does that mean to this? See that? So what's the identity and the things being said in the paper about what's going on in the local government around our town? Number 2, the second sector that makes a big difference in our town is the private sector, labor. What are the industries that drive our town? That's pretty obvious, right? That one's not hard to figure out. But hey, listen, what's the next phase going to look like? The carpet capital's changed. What is Carpet Capital 2.0 going to be like? Did you know there was a meeting of 300 young business leaders a couple of weeks ago at the Dalton Trade and Convention Center, of guys just sitting there and envisioning, 30-something-year-old guys sitting there and envisioning what the next look of Dalton should be like? Why weren't we in that conversation? Boy, I'd have loved They had a relationship with whoever those people that pulled that thing together, and they called and said, hey, why don't you send a couple of guys from the church and y'all brainstorm about this? Boy, we'd have had some great things to say, wouldn't we? Amen. You see, guys, we got to get into the soil. We've got to get into these conversations. What are the employment opportunities? What is closing? What is opening? What's the new businesses coming in? How are people being equipped to work in our town? Sector number 3, education. What are the educational opportunities? What are the schools in the area? Where are the schools? What is the reputations of the schools? And how do these schools impact the community? Unless you are new like me and looking for a place to take your daughter to school, you should hear this conversation. I have learned more about our town by asking this question. Tell me about this school. A lot of people told me a lot of stuff about Dalton Middle School. You know what I did? I called a coach and I went up there and spent an hour and walked around and said, show me what's going on in school. I've had more invitations by more principals to say, hey, come by, I'll walk you around. Okay. Hey, when you enter that conversation, you're new into town, man, you hear a lot about the schools. And when you hear these things going on in the schools, you hear what's going on at Murray County High School, North Murray School, and people go, well, I tell you what, let me tell you what's going on in this school system. And what I hear a lot about that school system is bullying is a big problem. Bullying, you know. Well, my daughters aren't that huge and tough, so I don't know about that, right? They're a bunch of wimps. I don't know how they would make it down there, you know. But I want to ask you this question. How has this church engaged that conversation of the things that people are fearing about what's going on in Chatsworth? You know why? Because everything that goes on in those schools impacts every other facet of our town. You say, come on. You know how many people said, you don't want to buy a house there? You don't want to buy a house in Dalton City. You don't want to buy a house in Whitfield County. You don't want to buy a house in North End. You don't want to buy one on the South End. You don't want to buy one in Chatsworth. I don't know where to buy a house. You guys live here, but I can't. I don't know what to do. You know? But it's amazing when you enter into those conversations, the way people talk about things going on around town, and all of a sudden you hear this, man, I'll tell you, this is the school system. This is an awesome thing that's going on over there. And you turn around and you say, well, that dude hates it. Yeah, this is a great thing about this school. This is a great thing about this part of town. And you hear, this is where you want to be. Why? You know why? Because the educational sectors impact life in our town. They are the things people are talking about. Number 4, churches, places of worship, and ministries. What are the other churches in the area? What is our relationship with the other churches around? I heard a lot of people talking about Rockbridge. Rockbridge this, Rockbridge that. You know what I did? I called the pastor my first week here and said, let's have lunch. I want to hear about Rockbridge. And I sat down with him and I talked to him. I said, how are you reaching people in our town? Tell us what's going on in our town. And you know what? He was a great resource to me. I learned a lot of stuff from Pastor Matt up there. He's a cool guy. He doesn't eat as much as I do, but he's a cool guy. I can tell you that right now. I felt kind of ashamed. I was like, man, you're just real healthy. Is there a predominant theology or set of core beliefs in our town? You better believe it. This is a very conservative, very traditional, very independent, church-minded part of the world. Even people, you know what's amazing to me? Even people who don't go to church in our town have uncompromised values and core beliefs that they will hold to and fight you tooth and nail, even though they don't go to church anywhere. You know what? That's hard to work through when you're trying to share the gospel with somebody. You know? Think about it. How does the community perceive the churches? Have there been a lot of church fights in our town? People's like, yeah. Sure are. You know, that impacts the way you reach people in our town. Liberty's going to have to demonstrate something to a lot of people. Not only do we believe things strongly, but we love each other. And we're going to love you. And we're not going to pull out swords and cut each other up. We're going to behave because we're the people of God. How do they know we really love Jesus? By the love that we have for one another. And this community, I think, is waiting to see a group of people like that. Is there any organized, non-Christian presence in the community? I drove around last Saturday, took a real interesting picture. See that picture? Dalton Islamic Center. That is the last thing I thought I'd see in Dalton, Georgia. How about that? I was like, wow, Shannon, look. And I wish I could have taken the picture in just the right way, because if you got the right angle, right up here on the hill are 3 crosses. I thought, how ironic is that? How cool. I have to tell this story one of these days, but I got in all kinds of crazy trouble with the Islamic people in Birmingham because we did a series of sermons called Investigating Islam. And the next thing I knew, that next Wednesday night, the imam, the president of the Islamic Society, and about 18 other guys from the Islamic group were sitting in our church. They wanted to hear what I had to say. And they were pretty surprised. They said, hey, that's pretty scholarly. We're really surprised at how you treated that. And you know what they did? They said, hey, would you like to come to lunch with us? Now, a lot of you are like, oh, my Lord, Brian is trying to blow you up. You know what? I'm just dumb enough that I looked at them and said, yeah, let's eat. So listen to me. They invited me up to the mosque. I took another guy from our church and we met them for lunch. And they just let us sit there and ask question after question after question after question. I went on my blog and I wrote an article called Lunch with Islam. You go look it up. That was the most fascinating conversation I've had in a long time. And I want to tell you, it was one of the most convicting conversations I've had in a long time. Those guys are studied. They are sharp. They know their stuff, not only about Islam, but listen, about everything you and I say we believe. Man, they can challenge you. And it was a pretty awesome tour. I learned a lot of things that day that opened my eyes. I wonder how many guys in this church say, man, I'd love to go up there and check that place out. I'd love to go inside and see what it's like. How many of you guys like to do that one day? Some of you are like, what? I told Shannon, I said, I'm going to try to get in trouble with them, see if they'll invite me to lunch too. Right? If we can make that happen, we'll go up there and check it out. I want you to see it. It's pretty amazing thing that's going on there. You'll learn so much about the culture from which this Bible came. You got to understand, this is Jacob and Esau. And when you hear things from their perspective, man, it makes a lot of things in the Bible really come alive, and you realize that tension of the gospel that's in there and what's trying to go on there. So how do these questions relate to us as a church? If we're going to have an effective strategy for reaching the people of our town, we've got to ask these questions. We've got to spend some time and invest in time in saying, what's the story? What's going on? And when we do that, here is what I think we'll kind of come out with. Number one, we do not need to start a Christian version of something or something new. You know what a lot of times we've done by starting the Christian cafe or the Christian radio or the Christian this or the Christian that is we have pulled ourselves completely out of the soil. I don't know if you hadn't figured this out, but lost people don't listen to Christian radio. You're not adding a whole lot of manure to their life if you're not even singing songs to them, right? That's the deal. But we've tried to pull away. Hey, listen, we don't necessarily need to start another Christian coffee shop. You know what we need to do? We need to go to Starbucks more. And sit down with the people in the soil where they are. We don't necessarily need to come out of these things. We need to do what the vine dresser is saying. Hey, let me loosen the soil and dig around and change this thing. And then we can influence thought. Then we can give it nutrients. Then whatever we load into the soil is being uploaded by the culture. You see this? Number 2, we need to evaluate our personal involvement in the institution. Who works where? Are we equipping and encouraging our members to make disciples where they work? Are we encouraging and equipping our members to work? What are the connections we have with the leaders and influencers in the institutions in our town? If I were to call a school, would we know what's going on there, who runs that school, and how we can be a blessing to them? Number 3, we need to engage in intentional partnerships. What can we do to connect with various sectors of our city? What can we do to make our church a place where the various sectors of our city intersect? What can we do to become a church that brings the business leaders, the private ministry institutions, and the educational people together? You see that? If we can develop a strategy where we become a crossroads that facilitates a conversation about things going on in our town, again, we influence the soil. The next time they have, I don't know, the rodeo at the Saddle Club or whatever. I heard Shane told me that you guys went up there and handed stuff out and do different things at different rodeos and things going on in their town. What is the mayor's or the councilman or however it's organized around here, what is it they're trying to pull off that they need volunteers for? What if we had a ministry in our church that was nothing but people who were passionate say, you know what, we're going to learn how to go to an event and facilitate ticket sales or concession booths or whatever, and whenever anybody needs something in Chatsworth or Dalton, they know to call Liberty Baptist Church because they got 20 people who come down to do a quality job if we call on them. Right? Whatever convention it is, whatever's going on, it would be amazing if we were down there a part of the soil. Number 4, engage problems in our town with long-term solutions that not only change the soil, but give people a chance to change. You know what Geomatics did? He said, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you what I know. I'm going to show you how to do it, but ultimately the decision's yours. I won't give you my time. I'm going to give you a chance to change. Vine dresser said, let's give it a year. See if it bears fruit. Let's get in here and dig down and work hard. Instead of simply doing things and ultimately ignoring the problems going on in our town, how are we going to address the real issues? You know, and again, when I say this, I'm not saying these are bad things. Revivals, crusades, whatever. We need to have those things because they do reap a harvest. I am not saying these things are bad. You hearing me? This means yes, this means no. Everybody get me? Brian is pro-revival, okay? But here's what I am saying. If all we do is revivals and crusades, those are great flashes for a week that pluck ripe fruit off of a tree of lost souls. But ultimately, they are not conversations about the dirty things that go on in our town. Case in point. Let me raise case in point of something that we need to really think hard about. And I think we've began a good conversation, but we need to think hard about this. I've heard several times of how great Vacation Bible School is at Liberty. I've heard that's like, the stuff here. But I've also heard there's a lot of Hispanic people who come the week of Vacation Bible School, and then we don't see them the rest of the year, and then they'll be back next year at Vacation Bible School. All I'm asking is this: how do we change that? How many of us are learning to speak Spanish? All right. Somebody. Como está, right? You know, we can't, and what I'm saying is we need to have Bible school, but we can't just think in terms of that's all we do. We got to think, how do we get into the soil? How do we go around the tree, loosen up the soil, apply ourselves, download our nutrients into that thing so that eventually over time, takes time, it's uploaded into the plant and it brings life back to our town. That's the way the gospel works. Would you bow your head and close your eyes with me just for a minute? Let's go to the Lord in prayer tonight. And the invitation tonight's real simple. Real simple. I know this is a very different sermon. It's a very different series of sermons. Very instructive. Takes a lot of meditation and thought. These are not things you just respond to very quickly. But number one, if you're here tonight and you say, I don't know Jesus Christ as my Savior. I've heard the gospel today, or I've heard the gospel this week, and I want to talk to somebody about how I can solidify that decision and come to Christ. You come. If you're here tonight and you say, I'm really excited about what it seems like God's doing here at Liberty, and I'd like to talk to somebody about how to make this my church home, we'd love for you to come and let's talk. But here's what I want to ask the church to do. You can stay in your seat, you can come to the altar, whatever it is. But just again, we've prayed for this every Sunday night. God, open our eyes to what's going on in our town. Help us to think tonight, Lord, about how we can loosen the soil and make some change. God, give me vision of how we can involve ourselves in the institutions and begin to upload these nutrients that'll bring life, resurrection stuff into the soil of our town. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you for this night. Thank you for this message. God, thank you for these people. And Lord, we don't want to do a work that's just a flash in the pan, God. We want to do something that makes disciples in our town for years and years to come. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand together? If God's calling you to come, would you come?